My name is Emily Thompson. I am 31 years old. 5 years ago, my sister in law quietly pushed my brother into sinking family savings into a fake consulting venture she ran with a hidden partner, leaving the rest of us to scramble and cover the shortfall while she claimed it was just bad luck. But right now, in the crowded waiting area of our family lawyer's office in suburban Boise, with my father recovering from a sudden heart scare in the hospital next door, I overheard my sister in law on a hushed call outlining exact steps to rewrite the family trust and move the liquid assets before any challenge could stick. My stomach dropped as the words sank in. I gripped the edge of the plastic chair and swore. Right then, I would uncover every detail of her plan, no matter how much it shattered what was left of our family. If you have ever caught a family member scheming behind your back with money or trust on the line, smash that like button and tell me in the comments what you did next. I read every single one, and it helps more than you know. That overheard phone call hit me like a freight train and forced me to face how deep the betrayal ran. I had come to the lawyer's office because my father's doctor had insisted we update the trust paperwork while he was still strong enough to sign just in case. My brother Daniel and my sister in law had driven in from their place across town, acting like the perfect supportive couple. My sister in law had always been the one who smiled widest at family gatherings, the one who remembered birthdays and brought homemade casseroles, the one who made everyone feel like she was the glue holding us together after my mother passed 6 years ago from a fast moving illness none of us saw coming. At 31, I worked in healthcare administration at the local hospital system, the same field I had built carefully since moving back to Boise 10 years earlier after college. I had been careful with my heart and my finances the way people get after watching one too many relationships crumble under pressure. My brother had met my sister in law 18 years earlier at a charity event downtown. Oh, she was 38, then a financial consultant who specialized in estate work for families with solid but not flashy portfolios. She had grown up in the area, moved away for university, and come back to build her practice. She was calm and measured, always asking the right questions and listening like she truly cared. The first time I met her was at a small dinner my parents hosted at their house in the suburbs. She was tall, well dressed without trying too hard, and she had this way of making whoever she spoke to feel like the center of the room. She asked about my job with what seemed like genuine interest and knew enough about healthcare systems to ask smart follow up questions. She was attentive to my brother in a way that looked effortless. I drove home that night and sat in my apartment for a long time, thinking something felt off, like she was performing the role of the perfect partner rather than actually living it. My mother would have told me I was being paranoid. Maybe she would have been right. I kept the feeling to myself. They dated for 20 months before they got married. He proposed at the same restaurant where they had their first real date. I called my father from the parking lot afterwards, still wiping happy tears, and told him I was thrilled for them. I was not entirely lying. I wanted to be thrilled. The wedding was a modest affair with 70 guests at a local winery outside town. My sister in law organized most of it herself, with help from her closest friend Lisa Harper, who had flown in from Portland for the weekend. Victor Kane, a business associate she mentioned in passing, showed up the evening before with what seemed like half his wardrobe and spent the morning before the ceremony taking calls in the garden that he ended quickly whenever anyone came near. I told myself that was normal. Consultants take calls on weekends. That is simply the life. Then came the investment mess 5 years ago. My sister in law had pitched a small real estate side project to my brother as a way to grow the family portfolio. She showed us spreadsheets and projections that looked solid. My father, still grieving my mother and trying to honor her wish that he slow down, agreed to let them use a portion of the family savings. It was not enormous by some standards, but it represented decades of careful work. 6 months later, the project collapsed. My sister in law said the market had shifted unexpectedly. She offered to help cover some of it from her own accounts, but the money never fully came back. My brother defended her fiercely. I stayed quiet because I did not want to cause drama, but I started paying closer attention after that. Now, here we were again gathered because my father's doctor had warned us that the heart episode could happen again without warning. The family trust my parents had set up after my mother's passing was the one thing that still tied us all together. My father was the primary trustee, but my brother and I were the main beneficiaries. My sister-in-law had never been formally added, but lately she had been dropping hints about how helpful it would be to have her listed as a co-trustee for practical reasons. I had brushed it off until that phone call in the waiting room. I kept my face completely still. 15 years in healthcare administration will teach you that much at least. I stepped closer to the half open door of the small conference room where my sister in law had taken the call. Her voice was low but sharp. Victor, listen. The trust modification form is the key. I need his signature on page 4 and Daniel's on page 7. If we get both before the end of next week, I can have the transfer request submitted by opening of business the following Monday. The banks will not flag it if it comes through with both signatures on file. Victor's voice came through the speaker just loud enough for me to catch. And the property transfers? My sister-in-law answered smoothly. Those take longer, but they do not matter. The liquid assets in the investment account alone are worth more than enough. We will be clear before anyone realizes the transfer was not a routine distribution. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. This was not a casual conversation. This was a plan. I backed away quietly and slipped into the hallway, pretending to check my phone. When my sister-in-law stepped out a minute later, she was all smiles again. Everything okay, Emily? You look a little pale. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes were busy in a way her face was not. I forced a small smile. Just worried about my father. She nodded like she understood perfectly and squeezed my arm. We all are. That is why it is so important we get these papers sorted quickly. Family takes care of family, right? The words landed like a slap wrapped in concern. My father came out of the exam room a few minutes later, moving slowly but determined. He had always been the steady one, the man who had built a modest but solid commercial real estate portfolio over 4 decades in the Boise area. He looked at all of us and said we should head to the house for a quiet dinner to talk through the paperwork. My sister-in-law immediately offered to pick up takeout from our favorite Italian place. My brother agreed. I nodded along, but inside I was already calculating my next move. I could not let this slide. Not again. Later that evening at my father's house, the conversation stayed light at first. My sister-in-law was in excellent form, making a toast to my father's health that sounded genuinely moving. My cousin Sarah Mitchell, who had driven over from Twin Falls to check on us, leaned over and whispered that my sister-in-law seemed more involved than usual. I told her I hoped it was just concern. At 8:45, my sister-in-law excused herself to make a quick call. She walked toward the back hallway that led to the guest room. I gave it 4 minutes, then excused myself with a comment about needing water. The house was quiet. I moved slowly down the hall phone, already recording in my pocket on voice memo. When I reached the area outside the guest room, I could hear her clearly. The trust modification is ready. Your contact reviewed it right. I need the signatures before the end of the week. If we lock that in before the weekend, the transfer can go through Monday morning. The banks will not question it if it looks routine. Victor's voice answered. What about my father? My sister-in-law laughed softly, that pleasant laugh I had heard 1,000 times at family dinners. He does not have signing authority anymore the way the trust is structured now. Even if he figures it out, there is nothing he can do legally until after the money moves. By then, we will be 2 states away. My hand tightened on the phone. This was not speculation. This was a coordinated plan, and my sister-in-law was at the center of it. I sent a quick text to my best friend Olivia Grant, who had known me since college and worked as an executive assistant at a local law firm. She replied almost instantly that she could put me in touch with a private investigator she trusted. I slipped the phone back in my pocket and walked back to the dining room like nothing had happened. My sister-in-law returned a minute later, smiling as if she had just checked the weather. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk and coffee. My father looked tired, but relieved that the family was together. When my brother and my sister-in-law finally left, my father turned to me in the kitchen and asked if everything was all right. I told him we needed to talk in the morning alone. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. His reaction was not the usual quiet agreement I had seen before when my sister-in-law spoke. This time his jaw tightened and he said quietly, If there is something I need to know, Emily, tell me straight. I am not as fragile as everyone thinks. It was the first time in years I had seen him push back against the easy flow my sister-in-law usually directed. The next morning, I called my father before my sister-in-law and my brother could come back over. I met him in the garden behind the house and laid out what I had overheard. He listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from surprise to something harder, more focused. When I finished, he did not shift uncomfortably or change the subject. Instead, he stood up slowly and said, "Then we handle this the right way. No accusations yet. We look first." His voice was steady, but I could see the quiet anger in the way he gripped the back of the chair. He had always been the one who paid attention, the one my mother had made promise to watch over us without smothering. This time, that promise was going to be tested in a way none of us had expected. I left his house with a plan already forming. I called the family lawyer, Helen Reed, who had handled our affairs for nearly 20 years. She listened to the recording I had made and was quiet for a long moment. Then she said things I will not repeat in full because she is a composed professional, and she was not composed in that moment. When she finished, she told me the documentation would likely be enough to open a formal investigation, but the strongest outcome would be catching my sister-in-law in the act rather than just accusing her. I told her I would handle the rest. There is a particular kind of patience you develop when you have spent years watching family dynamics shift in ways that do not add up. You learn that the person who speaks first in the silence usually gives something away. You learn to wait. I called my best friend Olivia next. She put me in touch with a private investigator named Nathan Blake, a methodical man who had built a small practice in the area and did not speculate. He told me he could have surface work done in 6 days. I said I needed it faster. He said he would see what he could do. Those 6 days were some of the longest I have ever spent. My sister-in-law and my brother came by the house twice, helpful and easy to have around. I sat across the dinner table from my sister-in-law each evening and talked about my father's health and property values and the particular challenges of winter in the valley. She was very good at dinner table conversation. I found myself almost believing her concern, which made everything feel worse. Nathan Blake called on the 7th day. The man my sister-in-law had been speaking to was not just a business associate. His real name was Victor Kane, born in a small town in Montana 37 years ago. The career history Nathan Blake's sources uncovered was substantially different from the one my sister-in-law had described. There was a civil lawsuit in Montana from 9 years ago. A former partner had alleged that Victor Kane had misrepresented financial documents to gain access to a joint account and then liquidated it. The case had been settled out of court. There was also a previous relationship with a woman in another state whose father had owned a substantial commercial portfolio. The settlement had included a payment that came according to a reliable source from the father-in-law, who simply wanted the situation to end quietly. And there was more. My sister-in-law and Victor Kane shared a numbered company registered in Idaho. The company had no visible business activity, but money had moved through it. Nathan Blake had the transfer records totaling nearly $180,000 over the last 22 months. I sat in my car outside my father's house with the phone pressed to my ear and looked out at the familiar neighborhood street. Nathan Blake said carefully that someone had done something very similar before and that the structure was similar enough to warrant serious concern. I asked him to keep digging specifically about any connections to our family trust and whether anyone had been making inquiries. He said he would call me back the following evening. When he did, the picture was complete. My sister-in-law had worked for 2 years as a paralegal at an estate planning firm in the area before leaving under circumstances Nathan Blake described as unclear. She now worked on paper as a freelance consultant, but her actual income appeared to come primarily from the numbered company she shared with Victor Kane. More importantly, Nathan Blake had found emails. My sister-in-law had used a personal account that was not sufficiently secured. In those emails, she referred to the family trust by a shorthand that made the nature of the plan clear. Victor Kane had been advising her on the exact order of documents needed to give them access before any legal challenge could be mounted. They were planning to move within 45 days of the trust modification being filed. I closed my eyes and thought about my mother. I thought about the 28 years she had spent helping my father build everything that was now sitting in the crosshairs of 2 people who had done this, or something very like it at least once before. Then I started planning. My father's next appointment with the lawyer was 11 days away. The meeting was scheduled at the same office to finalize the trust updates. Nathan Blake had confirmed that Victor Kane would be in town the weekend before, registered at a boutique hotel under his own name but listed on a side note as a consultant reviewing the paperwork. He was not on any official family list. My sister in law had added him under the cover of coordinating with the lawyer's office. The days leading up to the meeting dragged with new tension. My cousin Sarah Mitchell stopped by my apartment one evening with coffee and a worried look. She had heard fragments from my father and pulled me aside on the porch. Emily, I love my brother, but your sister in law has always had this way of twisting things to her advantage. If you are right about this, you cannot let it slide. But be careful. My father's heart is not the only thing at risk here. Her words stayed with me as I prepared, adding another layer of doubt I had to push through. I arrived at the lawyer's office the morning of the meeting, checked in, and met Nathan Blake in the lobby cafe. He handed me an envelope with a printed summary of everything he had found, signed and dated, along with a USB drive containing the documentary evidence. He also handed me a small digital recorder that fit in my jacket pocket and ran for 6 hours on a single charge. The meeting started at 8 o'clock. The conference room overlooked the foothills, and in the early morning light, the hills were sharp and clear. My sister-in-law was in excellent form. She made a comment about family strength that sounded moving. My cousin Sarah Mitchell leaned over at one point and said quietly that she thought she had misjudged her. I told her I hoped she was right. At 8:45, I watched my sister-in-law excuse herself, saying she needed to make a quick call. She walked toward the hallway that led to the side offices. I gave it 5 minutes, then excused myself with an apology about needing air. Nathan Blake had confirmed Victor Kane was waiting in a small side room my sister-in-law had booked under the consultant pretense. I took the hallway slowly, the recorder already running. When I reached the area outside the side room, I could hear two voices clearly. My sister-in-law's was the sharper one. She was going through a checklist. The trust modification form, she said. The one your contact reviewed. I need the signatures before the end of the week. If we get both, the transfer can be submitted Monday. Victor Kane's voice answered. And my father? My sister-in-law said the property transfers do not matter. The liquid assets alone are worth more than enough. We will be clear before anyone realizes. My hand found the wall for support. I sent a text to Nathan Blake. Second hallway now. Then I sent one to my father. He appeared at the end of the hallway 90 seconds later, having told my brother he needed a moment. His face was very still. I pointed at the door, held up one finger, and he nodded. We stood together outside that door. From inside, my sister-in-law was talking about the timeline. Monday transfer, she said. Tuesday morning, they could be gone. Victor Kane mentioned an arrangement in another state that would accommodate the funds without difficulty. My father's hand found mine. He held it tightly. I did not look at his face because I did not want him to have to hold himself together for my benefit. When the voices paused, I knocked. There was a silence of about 5 seconds. Then the door opened, and my sister-in-law stood there. The sequence of expressions that crossed her face in the following 2 seconds told me more about who she actually was than 18 years of careful performance had managed to reveal. First confusion, then recognition, then a rapid recalculation, and then the smile. She actually produced the smile. Emily, Dad. What are you two doing back here? I looked past her at Victor Kane, who was sitting at the small table with a folder open in front of him, a legal-looking folder. Who is this? My voice was entirely level. My sister-in-law said smoothly, This is Victor Kane. He is the consultant I mentioned, the one reviewing the trust language for us. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, I heard what you said about the trust. My sister-in-law's smile did not disappear immediately. That is the thing about very practiced people. They can hold a position slightly longer than you expect, but it went eventually. From behind me in the hallway, I heard footsteps. Nathan Blake had arrived with two individuals I recognized from a meeting I had attended that afternoon at a nondescript office downtown. Detective Andrea Holt and her colleague from the Financial Crimes Unit, who had listened for 90 minutes to Nathan Blake's documentation and Helen Reed's legal summary, and had agreed that what they were hearing constituted sufficient grounds for an active investigation and immediate intervention. I turned to my sister-in-law. I want you to understand something. I know who Victor Kane really is. I know about the lawsuit in Montana. I know about the previous settlement. I know about the numbered company you share. I know what you plan to do with my family's assets, and so do the police. Her face had gone entirely still. Detective Holt stepped forward and identified herself. She told both my sister in law and Victor Kane that they were being detained for questioning in connection with an investigation into alleged financial fraud. She was calm and professional, and she read them their rights in the particular flat way of someone who has done this many times before. Victor Kane said something sharp about lawyers. My sister in law said nothing at all. They were escorted from the room. The folder on the table, which did indeed contain the trust modification documents with my father's name already filled in on page 4, was photographed and taken as evidence. I stood in the doorway of that small room for a moment after they were gone. The foothills were still visible through the window, fully lit now in the morning sun. A few cars moved along the road below. Then I went back down the hall with my father. What happened next was not easy. My brother stood in front of the small group in the conference room and told them in fewer words than I would have managed that the meeting was being postponed, that there were complications, and that he would appreciate their privacy and their support in the coming days. Some people looked relieved in the way people do when something they suspected but could not say is finally acknowledged. My cousin Sarah Mitchell sat with him for an hour afterward, and I was glad for that. I took a walk alone around the hospital grounds later that morning. It was a cool day for early spring, the kind that reminds you that winter's hold in the valley is always temporary. I thought about my mother. I thought about the way she used to sit in the garden at the family house in the evenings with a glass of wine, very still, watching the light change over the foothills. She had an instinct for stillness that I was still learning. The investigation moved forward over the following months. I will not detail all of it because some of it is still ongoing, but the core of what Nathan Blake and Helen Reed had assembled held. My sister-in-law and Victor Kane were formally charged in connection with the Montana case and the previous settlement, which investigators were able to reopen with new evidence, as well as the planned fraud against the family trust. The former business partner in Montana, a man named Gerald Vance, who had spent 9 years believing no one would ever take his complaints seriously, called me directly to say thank you. That call was unexpectedly hard to get through. My brother took 5 months to settle himself. He stayed in Boise but took a leave from work for 8 weeks, spent time with friends, drove up to my father's house several weekends to sit in the garden with us and talk about nothing in particular or everything in particular depending on the day. He was angrier than he was sad, and I think that was the right proportion. The question he came back to most often was how he had missed it. You did not miss it, I told him on one of those weekends in early December, sitting outside with the last of the fall sun on the dormant grass. You felt it. Something in you already knew. The weeks after the confrontation unfolded in ways that left me questioning every choice I had made. The investigation stretched into a slow, grinding battle that drained more than just time. Nathan Blake called 3 days later with more details that turned the knot in my stomach even tighter. He had dug deeper into the numbered company and found transfers totaling nearly $180,000 over the last 22 months, all funneled through accounts that looked legitimate on paper, but led back to Victor Kane's old associates in Montana. The evidence was there, but Nathan Blake warned me that my sister-in-law had already hired her own lawyer who was preparing to claim the recording was taken under duress and that Victor Kane had been pressuring her. My best friend Olivia Grant sat with me in my apartment that afternoon and listened while I replayed the call. She shook her head and said the system sometimes protected people like my sister-in-law better than it protected families like ours. I met my father the next morning at his house and showed him the new transfer records. He listened with his jaw set, but when I suggested we push the financial crimes unit to move faster, he surprised me completely. Instead of the steady support I expected, he slammed his hand on the table and raised his voice in a way I had rarely heard. Emily, we cannot destroy what is left of this family over suspicions. Your brother loves her. If we go full force now, he might never forgive us. The outburst hung in the air between us. Then he stood up abruptly, muttered something about needing air, and left the room without another word. I sat there, stunned, the coffee in my mug going cold. It was the first time I had seen him choose peace so fiercely that it felt like he was choosing against me. My cousin Sarah Mitchell tried to play mediator later that same week. She invited all of us to a quiet dinner at her hotel to clear the air. My sister in law arrived looking composed and concerned, but the moment the conversation turned to the trust, she leaned forward with that same sharp smile I had come to dread. Emily, I have always admired how protective you are of your father, but sometimes protection starts to look like you do not trust the rest of us at all. Your brother and I have built a life together. We deserve better than being treated like criminals over one overheard phone call. Her words carried that long held resentment as if she had been waiting years to say them. My brother nodded along his eyes, avoiding mine. My cousin Sarah Mitchell suggested we all take a breath, but the damage was already sinking in. The following evening, I sat in Dr. Laura Simmons' office for the first time. She was the therapist Olivia Grant had recommended after I started waking up at 3 in the morning, replaying my sister in law's voice on the recording. Dr. Laura Simmons listened quietly while I described the way my father had snapped and then walked out. She asked gently if I was prepared for the possibility that pushing this further might cost me more than money. I left her office with a heavy feeling that the right choice might not look like justice at all. Mark Reynolds, the family accountant who had handled the trust for nearly 15 years, called me the next afternoon with numbers that made everything feel even more urgent. He said my sister in law had already filed paperwork requesting an emergency review of the liquid assets, claiming it was to protect my father's interests during his recovery. The request itself was not illegal, but the timing felt like another quiet step in her plan. I told Mark Reynolds we needed to block it, but he warned me that any public fight could trigger a countersuit for defamation that might drag my name through the mud at the hospital where I worked. The thought of losing my job on top of everything else made my hands shake. The tension built to a breaking point 2 weeks later when my sister-in-law asked for a private meeting at a coffee shop near the hospital during my lunch break. I agreed because I still hoped there might be some scrap of honesty left in her. She sat across from me, stirred her drink slowly, and delivered the words with cold precision. Emily, I know what you think you heard, but if you keep pushing this, the only person who gets hurt is your father. His heart cannot handle another family blow-up. Your brother is already talking about stepping back from all of us if this escalates. Is that really what you want, to be the one who tears everything apart because you could not let go of one misunderstanding? The sarcasm in her voice was laced with something darker, a resentment that had been simmering since the day she realized I was not as easy to charm as the rest of the family. I felt the words land like a slap I could not return. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Drop it, or everyone finds out how unstable you have been since your mother passed. Your choice. I knew it was from her or Victor Kane. The threat sat there in the dark, daring me to keep fighting. The final meeting at Helen Reed's office came 11 days later. We gathered in the same conference room with the foothills visible through the window. My sister-in-law arrived with Victor Kane in tow as her consultant, acting as though nothing had happened. My brother sat beside her, his hand on her knee. My cousin Sarah Mitchell had come to offer support, but she kept glancing at my father with worry. When Helen Reed started laying out the evidence, my sister-in-law interrupted with a calm, cutting tone. This is all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by Emily's overprotectiveness. I have statements from people who know Victor Kane and me that prove we were only trying to help with estate planning. The room went silent. My father looked between us, his face pale. Then he spoke, voice low but firm. Enough. I will not watch this family collapse. Emily, if there is any doubt at all, we let it go. For my sake. For all of us. His words landed like a final door closing. I saw in that moment that pushing harder would mean losing him entirely, and possibly my brother for good. The legal team advised that even with the recording, a skilled defense could drag the case out for over 2 years and cost us more than $200,000 in fees we could not easily recover. My sister-in-law sat there watching me, her expression never changing, knowing she had won the long game. I made the painful choice right there in that room. I told Helen Reed to pause the formal complaint. I told my father I would step back. The trust modification was quietly shelved, but not before my sister in law and my brother managed to shift a portion of the liquid assets into a joint account they controlled, claiming it was for family emergencies. It was not the full plan they had wanted, but it was enough to leave a permanent mark. My brother barely spoke to me for the next 4 months. My cousin Sarah Mitchell sent polite texts checking in, but the warmth was gone. Dr. Laura Simmons helped me process the isolation, but even she admitted some losses do not heal cleanly. My sister in law remained in the family picture, smiling at gatherings and reminding everyone how lucky we were to have moved past the misunderstanding. My father's health stabilized, but the easy trust we once had never fully returned. I kept my job at the hospital, but the whispers followed me there too. In the end, I chose to protect what was left of my father's peace and my brother's marriage, even though it meant watching my sister in law keep her place at the table while I carried the weight of knowing the truth. I still drive past the coffee shop sometimes and feel that same drop in my stomach. The quiet voice that told me something was wrong had been right all along, but listening to it came at a price I am still paying. Real protection, I learned, sometimes means choosing the lesser pain and living with the heavier silence afterward. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever faced a moment where the only way to keep some family was to let go of the truth, drop a comment below and tell me how you handled it. I read every single one because knowing I am not alone makes carrying this a little lighter.